He's here. He's here. Now, in a random student media building, deep in the bowels of the recording studio, under the wooden plaster of a marked building, we once again make contact with our lead analyst, Scott Harris.
Hey, people, Scott here, back with another episode of Capitol Hill Landscaping with Scotty. I'm here joined once again by a very special guest.
Hi, my name is Alejandro, and I'm so glad to be in the show again.
We got quite a bit to talk about today, as anything, a week that seems completely boring and nonsensical for some reason has a lot happened in the span of, especially honestly for me, probably the past 48 hours.
Honestly, yes, same for me. I've seen a lot. I'm going to hit you with a lot of international things that I've been catching up to. Mm-hmm. And there's also a very big special event that just happened recently, and I want to share about it. So okay. I look forward to it.
Mm-hmm. I guess to start things off, I don't know if you saw or not. I watched like the first part of it, but the current president of El Salvador, actually, he went on like Tucker Carlson's like, not his primetime show, but kind of like his secondary show that he does.
Huh.
Where it's like, it's like a full on like hour-long interview. I watched the first like 10 minutes of it. And, he speaks like perfectly, like he speaks like perfect English. So you could just completely, like they could just communicate with each other. It's not like when Tucker did like, he went to Brazil for that Bolsonaro interview and like they had a translator the entire time.
Bolsonaro.
Yeah.
I remember him.
Is he still in Miami?
I think so. I mean, they did storm the Brazilian capital.
No, they did not just the capital. It was like
I think it was the Supreme Court, the House of Legislators, a bunch of stuff. I did not know that the El Salvador's president came here to Tucker Carlson's show.
Yeah, he's become kind of like this, kind of like, oh man, if only we had a guy like him here, kind of thing. That's kind of what I've seen. He's been propped up as this figure in the U.S. to be like, if only we had somebody like him as president. Because I remember I checked like his last approval rating like poll was at like an 82% or something along those lines.
Huh. So I don't know a lot about El Salvador. I mean, we are in a class about Latin America, but it's interesting because my girlfriend's family is from El Salvador.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I remember that one day her grandma was talking about it. We were talking about the gang violence, and she just spoke so highly of him. She was like, "Oh, now that we have, do you know his name?" Google time. But yeah, she spoke so highly of him. She was like, "Yeah, no, he's doing great work," and I was like, "Who is he?"
It's Nayib Bukele?
Nayib Bukele.
Bukele.
Like Berkeley, but spelled differently.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't know a lot about it. I mean, at least from her experience, she personally was like, now I would like to go back to El Salvador and visit. So it's interesting. I didn't know that he was so active internationally.
Yeah, like he's kind of, because I guess specifically the American media, like he basically released footage of like, hey, we have like these mega prisons to basically round up all these gang members to try to make the country safer. And it got a lot of attention in the U.S. And now the American right and conservatives are, they kind of propping up. It'll be like probably an international guest that like makes occasional appearances, kind of like a Tulsi Gabbard kind of situation.
I don't know who that is, but hey, I believe you.
Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder if they'll use his example to say, hey, we should be tough in crime.
Maybe, but I don't know. It's interesting to see because it's like, it seems what he's doing in El Salvador is what Reagan tried to do in some capacity, or what like some tough on crime politicians have tried to do, but have kind of utterly failed. But he was able to do it like radically successfully.
I think it's probably because of the size of the country. I mean,
I think
El Salvador's pretty small. It's one of the smallest nations in Central America, to my knowledge. Don't quote me. But I mean, you try to do the same thing here, and I don't think you'd even get close to even building another prison. because so much opposition. But at the same time, does El Salvador have private prisons, or is it state-owned?
I'm assuming it's state-owned.
Yeah.
Because if they have the amount of efficiency that they're using, it has to be state-owned, honestly.
Yeah, so basically, if they're bringing up in politics, you say, hey, nationalize prisons.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll help.
I probably would.
Honestly, I don't like the idea of private prisons.
It's
Yeah.
a very interesting industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's give you money for every person you put in jail.
We'll use the funny asterisk that's on the 13th Amendment, or is it it's the 13th or 14th? No, it's the 13th Amendment that says no forced labor allowed except if they're in prison.
I'm so glad Oregon passed it away. That they finally got rid of it. Legal slavery. Because I found it surprising when the measure came up. I was like, that's legal? Like,
well, yeah. How do you think your license plates get made? That's the stereotype. Where it's like, oh, if you had no private prison workforce, then you would have no license plates. That's the running gag.
I guess
I've heard.
I wouldn't be, paying $122 for my stickers if I didn't have license plates. So I'm just saying, you could get rid of a lot of, don't have to pay $122 in a month. So
it's true. It's true.
I just say, don't make prisons. Prison's bad. That's what I'd say. I think it's good though for El Salvador that they finally got to fix the what's it called?
The homicide rate.
The homicide rate and like the crime rate too, because it's especially I as an immigrant, it's hard to see Latin America just how hard it is, and I know tons and tons of immigrants, and I think internally you all kind of say, dang, we wish we were in our country, and it's sad to see how there's so little progress at times. And that kind of brings me to my other point. So perhaps you know about this country in Latin America. It's like Mexico. Maybe you've heard of it.
I believe I've heard of it.
Yeah.
At some points.
So it's a democracy, but recently the president kind of butchered the budget for the I think it's multi-party, so multi-partisan electoral institution. And he just said, hey, this institution is bad, and, we'll save millions if we just cut the budget. But this is the institution that oversees elections. And he wants to go ahead.
Isn't he a left-leaning president?
No.
Or was that the previous one?
That was no. He ran as a leftist with a coalition.
Okay, I see.
But the moment he took office, he just kind of started shifting slightly right. I think he's a conservative left, which was interesting because when I learned about him, I was like, okay, he's a leftist. So I expect some, sort of social reforms. But his main running things were, hey, we're gonna, what's it called? Not reform, but industrialize or modernize the south of Mexico, which is mostly dense jungles and small communities. And that's kind of where a lot of people said, hey, yeah, that'd be nice because a lot of modernization is centered in the center of Mexico. But all he did, at least from what I know, the biggest one is he wanted to build a new railroad. And he promised that it would be environmentally friendly, but he didn't do it. He skipped on a bunch of stuff, his engineers. And he said that it was going to be super cheap, like every other politician, super cheap, super fast. It's going to get done. It's going to make Mexico great again. And so far, there's been so many setbacks. The ground, apparently, it can't hold rails. Some of them are caves, so you can't expect too much. You can't, he didn't want to cut through forest. He said he wasn't, and then he's cutting through forest. And then it's super expensive, and a lot of that money, in my personal opinion, could have gone to social reforms, especially with the disparity on income in Mexico. You have very rich people and you have very poor people, especially in the south. So
he's effectively, what do you think is his purpose for removing that kind of this organization that oversees elections?
This is speculation. But a lot of the articles I read is he's always had a thing against it. There's almost, I think nowadays it's very common for somebody to say, hey, the election was stolen. And we saw it in the United States, we saw it in Brazil, and I think we're seeing that in Mexico as well, where he said he lost an election. He ran 3 times, and he lost the first 2, and in the second election, he lost by 1% of the vote. And, you know, everybody said it was legit, you know, nothing bad. But he kind of always had this, like, resentment over it. And he's also had a lot of setbacks with the institution where some of his, like, candidates for Senate and stuff were being denied because they weren't following the laws correctly. So he kind of started taking more rampant attacks on it. And this is, like, the most recent. I think this happened, like, 2 weeks ago, something around that.
Okay.
And I think it's important to talk about because I think we're seeing a lot of attacks into democracy, you know, where we're seeing a lot more of totalitarian regimes kind of trying to take over, or at least kind of not demoralize, but deface democratic institutions. Like we're seeing it here with the polls and, you know, voting rights. And then we're seeing it in Brazil where, you know, there's a literal group stormed, like we said, the whole, like, every governmental.
It did it on January 8th, and
Yeah.
they did it with 3 buildings with, like, 15 times the people.
Yeah, and it like, I mean, I remember seeing, like, there were fires inside the buildings.
It's not like the one, like, January 6th where the people, like, they got inside and they just kind of, like, they respected, like, you know, the red velvet rope.
Yeah, no. No, it was actually, it was almost like a, like, I hate to use this term, but it was almost like a Latin America dramatization of what happened. It's like I was watching a novela about January 6th because a bunch of Brazilians just started going like, oh, Bolsonaro won, Bolsonaro. And Lula is a leftist, so he's facing a lot of that coming out of Brazil. And I mean, I'm just kind of scared because, you know, as a Mexican, it's like, well, is Mexico going towards that again? And Mexico has a history of having a one-party rule. El PRI, yeah, that one.
Are they still active?
Yeah, they're still active. They're one of the, surprisingly, I don't know how, but they're one of the people who oppose this new thing. And I'm like, huh?
What?
Yeah, I know, right? That's what I expected. I was like, who?
Huh?
The PRI?
The
That
PRI?
one? That one. Are you sure?
This
No, not a typo?
this conservative right-wing party in Mexico that held power for what, 80 years?
70, 80 years?
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, you shouldn't do that. I'm like, huh? You you kind of did it. And it's interesting because it's this institution, it's called the INE, INE, National Electoral Institute. It's responsible for ending that kind of 70, 80 year regime they had. So I was surprised when I saw that they were like one of the, I think it's like a spokesperson or a party member or representative just automatically says, hey, you shouldn't do that. You know, like there's a limit. So it was very interesting. But I think a lot of people are speculating that he's just trying to keep his party in power. Because what he's trying to say is, well, the INE shouldn't have the power to run the elections because, you know, nobody oversees them. They're supposed to be their own thing, right? So he's saying the government should be the one like the government should have more power over the elections. And by cutting its budget, they're cutting hundreds of jobs. I mean, they're closing offices. I mean, they're reducing their ability to like deny candidates who don't follow electoral laws.
Okay.
And again, I think a lot of it comes out of his resentment that he just, you know,
Like out of spite?
yeah, like almost like, oh, remember when you know, said that I lost? Well, guess who lost this time? You know, who's laughing last? And it's just upsetting because again, it's a big blow to democracy, and there were protests against it. So I don't know, it's kind of bad. What do you think? Good move?
I don't know. I'm not super well versed in Mexican politics per se. I just remember, this guy is a leftist. He's elected, and what's this? It's 6 years.
Yeah,
per
6
term?
years a term,
And
and
he
they
was-
can re-elect.
And you can't run for re-election.
No,
And
you get one.
Was he re-elected in 2018, 2020?
He was elected in 2018
Okay.
because we have, and that's the scary thing. We have elections next year in Mexico.
Oh boy.
So he's just kind of setting the field. You know, it's like playing chess, but then you're taking pieces from the other side.
Okay.
So, and then it's supposed to be overseen by the Supreme Court, the Mexican Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping that they say this is unconstitutional because the sitting party shouldn't be able to run the elections. Because guess who did it? The PRI did it, and there's a very famous story about an election in Mexico where
Is it the one where they like cut the power?
yes, everybody knows it. I love it. They cut the power, and then all of a sudden the PRI candidate won, and I was like, huh, some ghosts.
And won immediately.
It makes it. It's funny that I like that. I'm glad my people know my country.
Because I remember it's probably been mentioned like 3 or 4 times
in class
this term so far, I want to say. And then
Yeah.
also in the previous term, I think.
Maybe. I don't think did I have a class with? Oh yeah, race and ethnicity.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I imagine he would have mentioned it, but it's just it's scary. We're almost going against democracy. So
I didn't realize that Mexico has a presidential election the same year that the U.S.
yes,
also has a
it's
presidential
terrifying
election.
because we last time we talked about how we both were like clenching our fists, knowing what was gonna happen. Now I have to do it with 4 fists because I got to deal with Mexico and the United States. I'm like, oh great.
Hey, speaking of 2024, we have new candidates.
Yes.
For president, we've got 2 ones that I'm more interested in that are Republicans that aren't Trump, and then the one Marianne Williamson for the Dems.
Oh, I didn't know a Democrat
Yeah,
finally stepped
Biden
up.
has a challenger.
Wow.
And his press secretary actually saw this morning basically was kind of deflecting about a question about like, how does the president feel about Williamson challenging him for the primary? And she just kind of deflected the question. Which,
She's like, who?
yeah, it's like, I guess they're kind of assuming that they already have the nomination in a way, but I don't know. It'll be interesting to see because the Dems have also, there's no more Iowa caucus, which thank goodness. If you don't know, the Iowa caucus Iowa's the first state in primary for both parties, but it, in my opinion, has probably one of the worst systems imaginable for selecting who gets a delegate. Like, there's a very famous video of the last presidential election where it was a vote. The Iowa caucus people, there was like a group of them that were debating, okay, should Bernie or Warren get this delegate? And then they had a coin toss, and they said heads.
Was it Warren?
Yeah, Warren, you get that delegate. And it's like, huh?
So we're just the people. No. Get those things out. No. A coin. We're gonna flip a coin.
Yeah, first off, it's not even like a ballot sent directly to party members. You have to show up and debate for like hours and hours at like a school, like a high school or something, and then come to a collective decision about who gets a delegate. I think you have to be a party of that particular party, but it's not like a direct like primary ballot like how we get them here. It's like you literally have to physically go and debate.
Dang.
Which is, I mean, it's cool.
Yeah.
In a way, it's awesome, but I don't think it's cool to decide. All right, a potential president gets to be decided with a coin toss.
Yeah, I think that's insane. No,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Thanks for bringing it out of the light.
Yeah.
Please. It's funny because I think I usually tell people, it's like, oh, you don't know what to do, you just flip a coin. So it's terrifying that it's probably somebody was like, who do we choose? I don't know, flip a coin. Okay,
Yeah, and I believe now the first state for the primaries, it's either Illinois or South Carolina. It's one of those two.
Are those tend to be swings? No, right?
No, but for a primary, they can definitely be deciding because the main reason Biden basically gained all his momentum was Super Tuesday in South Carolina.
Yeah,
because he destroyed Bernie in that area.
I remember Sanders. It almost feels like one of those like log cabin stories, where you're sitting in front of fires. I remember him, asking me to give him financial support and telling me I was gonna get free college.
Neither of those happened.
Neither, yeah.
And now we have on the Republicans we have
the sanctimonium.
Not yet. He's a wild card.
Yeah.
He might just bide his time. He might base like, all right, I am 2-term governor. I'm basically gonna just run and do my job for the amount of time I'm here and just do whatever in 2028. because that would technically make the most sense
Mm-hmm.
in a way. But now we have Nikki Haley.
I've read about her, and I was just kind of confused. I was like, where is she coming from? Because she didn't. Because I think the interesting thing for Republican candidates is they have to weigh in: do we attack Trump? Do we praise Trump, or do we just kind of coexist alongside? And I think that's because I remember I read like an opinion article on the I think it was the Washington Street or Washington Post. And in it, they were like, she's kind of taking a mild approach. Like she hasn't denounced anything about Trump, but she like kind of hints at it, but nothing clear. Like you really have to think. Like you'd have to listen to her and be like, guy, which guy? Guy with money, guy with tie. I'm like, oh, that could be Trump. Yeah, I see it. So interesting. What do you think?
I don't know. Nikki Haley's she's always been talked about. Like she was talked about in 2020 and 2022 a bit. Like she's like, if you go on like a random, who do you want to be the Republican nominee? Her name is always there, even though she was the governor of South Carolina and then the ambassador to the UN during the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm.
So her policies overall are kind of neoconish for the most part.
What does that mean?
Like kind of like very aggressive foreign policy,
Mm.
kind of like what Trump's foreign policy was
great.
in a way, but just it's her instead. And
Great.
then you have this other guy, Vivek.
Yeah, the businessman, right?
Yeah,
I read about him. I was like, who are you again?
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see because even then, the problem is that everybody realizes that Trump's base can just carry him through the nomination.
Mm-hmm.
And so if DeSantis tries to run, then he has to he's not competing with Trump. He's competing with Nikki Haley and Vivek.
Yeah. And, I wonder if Trump loses the nomination, if he'll just run independent.
He will.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I do not doubt that for a second.
And then that would just split the Republican
It
vote.
would split. It's so expected that I've seen like 24 like variations of election results,
12
like by
endings.
county. Yeah, literally 12 endings of Biden wins every single time.
Biden could just like play a dementia joke, and I bet he'd still win. He'd be like, oh, I forgot.
He probably would. It's like,
It reminds me of the time in our class when that guy just said, hey, Joe Biden has dementia. And then our professor was just like, slander. And I was like, I mean, it is slander.
it's pretty slander, but it's also not.
I mean, he is 80, but like, hey, Uncle Pepe in Costa Rica was old too. Everybody likes him, I think.
True.
You know.
I think it's the fact that we have an elderly president, but he doesn't have the charisma of Reagan because Reagan was in his late 70s and I think early 80s when he was president.
Reagan moment.
Which is really weird to think about still because I remember, he was the governor of California. When? The 60s, right?
I don't know. I honestly kind of, for the most part, ignored Reagan. But I do find it funny how avid he was against marijuana. I like to think that right now he's probably, like twitching in his coffin, realizing that Colorado, legalized it, California legal, Oregon, the entire, the federal government's basically just kind of like, can we still hold on? Can we still hold on? And I bet Reagan is just like twitching, just like, oh, what have they done to my country?
It's weird that they haven't done anything about that yet. When I remember I saw something where like through executive order, you could change the classification of it and it becomes legal in the U.S. overnight. Yeah. And it just doesn't do anything about that.
I mean, I think if Biden were to do it, several people would vote for him,
You get the progressive votes.
Yeah.
That's for sure, which is, he desperately needs the progressive votes.
Biden, if you're listening, make weed legal again, but like at a federal level. And then everybody will either be high while voting or will be voting for you. So, I mean, I think that's pretty good. A yes and a no can very simply turn into a yes and a no when high. I don't know.
You could definitely have a better shot in New York because I don't know if you saw, but did you see the swing, like the R swing in New York?
Oh, with
Schumer, Schumer basically
lost.
He didn't. I mean, he won, but like his like I think in his previous senatorial election, he won at like 60 to 70%. And then he only won by like 55, 45. Which, if you're thinking about, like, this is New York we're talking about.
Yeah, like it's a big Democrat stuff. And then a bunch of representatives won, lost too, and a bunch of Republicans. My favorite, it's Santos. Santos. I love Santos. Hey man, let's lie about our theses and run for the House of Representatives.
Just lie about literally your entire life, still be in Congress, and just deliver Chick-fil-A every day to the reporters that are just outside your office.
Hey guys, don't be mean to me. Here's some Chick-fil-A.
That's literally, I remember he just walked outside. He had a table outside of his office. People were swarming him. And then he just like left a big bag of Chick-fil-A, and it was just all basic sandwiches for the people.
Wow, not even the chicken ones. Do they sell? I don't know. I don't eat Chick-fil-A because they're,
it was just the original, because the original sandwich is just it's bread, chicken, and 2 pickles, and I think some mayo. No, it's just pickles.
I mean, I don't know. I don't like Chick-fil-A. They're not progressive. Let's put it that way. They're very.
It's very good chicken though.
I don't know, man. I've had it, and it's like, call me a Louisiana fan, but I think Popeyes is better. I mean, it's a kitchen in Louisiana, I think, or just a big corporation. But I think Popeyes is better. And if I do get ripped to pieces after people hear this, then we know Chick-fil-A is supreme.
Chick-fil-A during yeah.
You went to Santos event and got free Chick-fil-A.
I feel like I would just for that. If I was
honestly, yeah, I'd be like,
it's a free sandwich. Like, it's a free good sandwich.
Free food is free food.
It's true. Unless it's Falsette's, but that's technically speaking. But
he didn't say that.
The university, I'm not held liable. I'll edit that out later. Anyway,
mood. It's not slander.
Not slander.
Or liability. What's the other one called? I studied these and I forgot.
Liability.
No, slander and libel. Libel. That's what it is.
Is libel?
I think so. When I think it's slander, so it's spoken. Libel if it's written. And I think podcast counts as slander because it's recorded.
Gotcha. Understandable.
Anyway. Who else is announced?
I know there's one other
Republican, right?
Yeah, there's one other Republican, but it's like Bill Weld or something along that line.
Republican nominee number 3.
Yeah, Republican nominee number 3. They're gonna get 2 votes probably.
Hey, 2 votes is 2 votes. They will celebrate it. How do you think? What did you think of the State of the Union speech? I'm curious. Do you watch it?
I watched the highlight reel of it. I thought it was interesting. Honestly, yeah. I
honestly kind of, I tipped my hat to Biden when he started arguing with the Republicans in the middle of it. I was like,
I thought the
Marjorie Green Taylor.
Yeah, Marjorie Green Taylor.
Marjorie
just yelling and screaming. I was like, oh, okay.
Just a regular day.
I don't know. It was interesting. The idea of the Republicans wanting to cut Social Security and them like refuting that, even though they said it.
Yeah.
And then Biden saying, "You said you wanted to do this."
I think that was.
But I don't know. If in my Gen Z mind, it's like I'm not gonna benefit from this.
Hey, not now, but later.
Maybe
perhaps.
Hypothetically, I don't know.
If we make it there,
if we make it, and there's still plenty of money in that bank.
Yeah, see?
Maybe.
Biden was like, "Oh, looks like you guys are open for conversation." I love conversation. That's when I realized he's a good guy. I just that single, like, what was it? Like a 5-minute. That was my favorite part. Just seeing how
just a blip.
That blip, like if I memorize something, it's just Joe Biden being like, "You guys wanted to fund Social Security," and then they're like, "No, we never said that." And he's like, "Oh, great, cool, okay, let's talk about it." And then all the Republicans are like, "Oh, that's not how you play."
This is why I kind of wish Biden was like. I feel like if Biden was like 20 years younger,
oh, he'd win.
I would not doubt that his ability. Like,
yeah,
honestly, like if it was like, especially like 90s Biden.
I don't know. I think 90s Biden would be kind of cool, But I do find it funny. I don't know. I kind of find his stutter to be cute. It's like, oh, okay, stuttering.
Why?
So I think it's funny. He's got my vote.
He's the only one running, basically.
Yeah, basically, but he's got my vote. Unless what's the Democrat nominee
Williamson?
number? Williamson. Yeah, Williamson could have my vote. Just do something.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes in the primaries, which I'm talking. It's March.
So we got what?
It's
Less than a year.
6 months.
6. Oh.
Primaries start in 6. Like campaign season's basically already started.
Oh.
And it's basically we're in that early stage where like everybody is announcing, or everybody who wants to run is running.
I kid you not, I got like a shiver through me. Like I think my body's already like having like emotional distress over it. I'm not excited.
You think Bloomberg will run again?
Who?
Bloomberg.
Look, man, you had to say it twice because I didn't remember the guy.
He's the guy who like ran. He basically spent like $3 billion.
Yeah,
on
the guy that
ads.
spent a bunch and still lost. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I don't
because
know.
He joined like in the middle of like 2 like of the prime debates for the Democrats already happened at that point.
And then he was like, "Hey guys, vote for me." And then he spent a lot. I do remember. I think that was the only thing I read about him. Like, there was like no like description of what he was gonna do, but it was just like, "Hey, look at this guy. He spent like millions."
He spent more money than Hillary did, and he didn't even get across the primaries.
Oh, that's funny. I don't know. I think it'd be funny to see him drop another 5 million. Hey man, keep dropping money. Maybe it'll help. It's like maybe he thinks it's like a pay to win. If we pay enough, we might win.
It's true, maybe.
And perhaps the second time's the charm, and then who knows? Maybe he'll give more money to programs. Like maybe if we give more money,
We'll see.
So yeah, the Santimonium, right? I just love that name for him.
The Santimoni, which is it's because his last name, it's Italian last name. It's like holy or like it has a religious meaning to it, but it's like the Santimonious. It's like holier than thou or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
But
Trump called him that, and I just thought it was hilarious because he was like, because they put him in, I think it was a New York Post as the future. Like Ron, it's Ron, right?
Yeah, Ron DeSantis.
Yeah, and they put him as Ron the future. And then Trump responded by saying the sanctimonium, like, satanic. And I just found it funny because I don't know. How do you feel about Santis? I think he'll eventually join. How do you think he'll fare? Because for a while he was like the chosen Republican. Mm-hmm. But I've read a lot of the things. Yeah, he just kind of looks kind of mild at things.
He's very like standard. The only thing is the fact that he basically turned Florida from a swing state into a permanent R state for the next 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't like he won with a bigger margin than Gavin Newsom in California.
Yeah,
which says a lot.
Yeah, that's scary.
So it's like, I feel like he'll definitely run. Like no matter what, 2028, I think he's gonna run.
Yeah,
Trump will be too old by then, and
I don't know, man. He might run again.
Oh, boy.
They say if there's a will, there's a way. Sorry. He could be walking in a wheelchair and, still telling us how he'll make America great, great, great again. So he doesn't have my vote. But kind of insane what he's doing in Florida, huh?
Yeah.
What do you think of the subject of AP African Studies being just saying, hey, that's not real history?
It's very interesting. I don't know. Because I didn't realize that you would have that much. I guess the idea is that making like the state government more involved at the local level, kind of, in a way, it's kind of centralizing education. Mm-hmm. I haven't read into the specific examples that they cited for AP African American Studies. Mm-hmm. But I'm assuming it's generally just looking at American history through an African American lens.
I imagine so.
Because, I don't know. But it's interesting to see that as like, oh, this is an AP college credit course. Because I don't think we even have that at all here.
Think so. But I like to think that it would be like, something related. Like, I mean, we have here a lot of Latin America focused like classes. And I feel like something tells me if, Ron DeSantis ran in Oregon and won, he'd be like, hey, this Latin America stuff, it's not very America, very American of us.
I feel like I disagree with that because I remember what our professor said, where he decided to change it from like, instead of like bashing the US 101 kind of course, it's like, hey, let's actually just take a look at each individual example and just kind of understand why this happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might be it. It just might be the tone of how it might be taught in a way. I'd have to look into specific examples.
Or like the syllabus of the class.
Yeah, like, because all of, say, Professor Pellegrini's syllabuses are like, it's basically like, oh, we're going to learn and understand why and how this happened without really interjecting any sort of opinion. It's just kind of a general, oh, why did this happen? What's going on here?
Yeah, that could be it. But I still feel like having somebody say, oh, well, we don't want to just bash the United States through the lens. See, I don't know. It sounds a little bit like censorship, which I think is a little ironic. Because a lot of conservatives really center on the idea of freedom and being able to say, there's one of my favorite cases the Supreme Court heard was, I don't remember the name, but it was one in Texas. And it was about a guy who burnt a flag. And, all of Texas, lit on fire and said, how could he do that? You can't do that. You can't, deface the flag and stuff like that. And the Supreme Court ended up saying, hey, if he wants to burn the flag, he can. It's part of his First Amendment. It's like protected by freedom of speech. So I don't know. I just think that if somebody were to, like, if you were to switch it to like American studies, a class of American studies, and a Democrat were to like say, oh, we're not gonna teach it, I feel like a lot of people would be like, hey, you're trespassing on the grounds of the freedom of speech. Because I don't know. Because like even our history class, I feel like a lot of it, like perhaps it's not presented as like, hey, we're bashing the United States, but you do get to see the ugly sides of the ugly side of the United States. And I feel like this class perhaps would have been more aggressive on its teaching, but it still give you grant you the view of, hey, we're gonna like show you the United States is, not all flowers and roses, but there's also been quite ugly sides in it, like slavery. And I think slavery should be talked about,
Oh, yeah.
Like, it kind of reminds you of when Japan said that they were going to, like, they didn't acknowledge the rape of Nanking for, like, the longest time. I don't know if they still do.
There's been, like, I've heard, like, kind of, I've seen, like, Twitter things, like, back and forth, and basically said, like, it's kind of not, like, a full acknowledgement, but there's definitely, it's, like, been talked about, obviously.
Okay. And I feel like we shouldn't just say, hey, we shouldn't just show the pretty side. We should also show, like, there's an ugly side. Like, I mean, Mexico, I mean, there's good things about it, and then there's very terrible things. There's Mexico, there was a student killing, protest of students, and the military showed up and shot everyone. And the Mexican government covered it up. And if that were to happen, I think people would be outraged. So I think just the basis of censoring stuff like that just sounds almost like trespassing on the First Amendment. I don't know what you think. I'd like to hear what you think.
It's interesting because basically from what I remember hearing about that, they basically said, hey, this isn't right. And they sent it back to College Board and just come back with like a revised version of it. And then it'd be good to go because that happened like a few months back. So
yeah,
I need to go research the end results of it and see how it concluded, to see if they like got the curriculum back and like they sent it back to the state of Florida and they approved it.
I don't know. Like, again, you're right. It's been a while, so I don't know. But I do know that, I think, don't quote me, throughout this whole thing, just don't quote me. But I do recall that apparently he started putting like conservative heads into the board of education or stuff like
Florida
that.
State?
Yeah, for the state or something like that. But like, for example, the Disney thing, I know he put a full-on conservative to control the taxes, which I thought was interesting, out of all things, Disneyland.
I think it's interesting because it's like, it shows kind of because I remember the legislation for basically getting rid of Disney's special district is kind of going away, or like it passed some like body or house. Or
I think it passed. I think.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to me because that kind of shows like corporations can do this much, but I feel like they shouldn't own specific land or have this much autonomy, which I guess, I don't know. I feel like it kind of defines that kind of murky. Because I don't think I've told you probably my greatest fear
Go
in
ahead.
American. It's Amazon asking for like political representation.
Oh no, I don't think corporations should get any sort of political.
No, yeah, I know, but like I'm saying, like that's probably one of my greatest fear.
I think that's a valid fear. Everybody should be scared of that.
Yeah, where it's like this mega corporation. It's like you know about the Trade Federation in Star Wars.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
basically
okay,
basically
I get
that
it.
because this is a corporate entity that has actual representation and like
That'd be terrifying.
political power within a body of
Oh
representatives.
no.
And basically, I'm like, I don't want like actual like a corporatist.
We don't need Count Dooku to show up. Per se.
Yeah, and that's a whole Count Duke. That's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, no,
about
definitely.
the politics
There'll be
of
another
Star Wars.
We should do that. That'd be a fun episode.
That'd be a fun. That'd be
I'll
a
have to rewatch.
a side thing. But that would be a fun discussion because I'll be frank. I support the Confederacy of Independent Systems. I want to make that clear.
Okay. I was like, I had to think about it. I was like, which
Count Dooku,
Count Dooku's
Count
guys.
Dooku,
Okay.
Newt Gunray, all
Okay.
those blokes.
Yeah.
Not a huge fan of the Galactic Republic.
I mean, I don't blame you. I honestly, I watched these movies when I was a kid, and I was like, wow, Republic good. And then I watched it after I took a couple of political science, and I was like, wow, Republic bad. Because it's just, I saw there's this really good, and you maybe
Is it the politics of Star Wars?
Yes, I
yeah.
watched it. I'm so sorry for yelling. Put a loud noise warning in there.
Yeah, I will.
But like I just remember watching this video and I was like, it's just the fall of a democracy. And I don't want to point fingers, but like I don't know, maybe Mexico would become the next galactic republic thanks to AMLO. But
Are you saying he's Palpatine or something like that?
I mean, he has the age of Palpatine. I'm just correlation, causation. I don't know. Consequence. I mean, what's the other word? Coincidence? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
But I just remember watching it and like I rewatched the movies and I was like, wow, like this guy's just saying, hey, war's going bad. Give me more power. And the Senates are like, sure. And I was like, no wonder Count Dooku separate. But then it's kind of sad because
there's like it's co-opted, and then you realize, oh, it's actually this ginormous conspiracy to seize like absolute power and all these planets and like people that basically wanted like a separate like state.
It's just a ploy.
It's just a ploy, which is sad, but like the idea is good.
Yeah, I mean, I think
in theory.
I mean, Count Dooku. Well, I don't know. Obi-Wan in the third movie had a better beard. But that's my personal opinion. Interesting though. I don't know. Maybe Star Wars is trying to tell us something. Maybe we need a Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan, but no Anakin Skywalker.
No Hayden Christensen.
No. Well, Hayden, yes, but
no Hayden, but no Anakin.
No Anakin. Yes,
Okay.
there you go. See, that's what I like.
I guess going back to El Salvador, I find it interesting that I realized that I think a motivation for his policy is basically to stop people from leaving El Salvador.
I think that would make sense. Which is interesting because I was reading an article that talks about how a lot of immigrants in the United States are actually kind of leaving, which was interesting. And apparently it's a common trend because that's kind of what like balances the immigration crises. Because, people come in, but then older people just kind of go back to the country, which I didn't know about. I think it's pretty common for people to hear immigrants and they just stay. But no, it seems to be common for a lot of them to, settle for a bit, kind of get a life going. And then once their kids are self-sufficient, they go back. And the New York Times does a wonderful way of telling the story of a couple like that. The other thing I did want to bring attention to really quick is there was an investigation of child labor with immigrants. Very, very scary stuff. And Biden did announce something, and I would recommend looking into it. That's not to steal 40 hours of your day.
I heard about the child labor thing. Let's forget that was in Montana.
A bunch of states. I know companies like the people who make Cheerios have like immigrant children working in there. I remember because the New York Times again does a fantastic job of just capturing the like they have pictures and they have like kid testimony saying, oh yeah, I work like full hours and then I wake up to school, and I usually don't go to school because I go to work from like 7 in the morning to 6 p.m. and then I wake up at 5 in the morning to go to work, and then I don't even have time to do homework.
Wow.
So it's scary. And then last point, I promise, this is it. I'll tape my mouth shut next. But we had I don't know if you heard, but Judy Shepard came to the campus.
I did not heard, no.
No, wonderful. It was one of the most life-changing experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, she talked about, violence in the United States, and she didn't just center on just like hate crimes of the LGBTQ plus community, but she also focused on, minorities, immigrants, and, she put a lot of effort on saying, go out to vote. Like, if you want to see change, you got to vote. And I guess that's what I wanted to stress about. It's just like, we like to complain about politicians. We like to argue about politicians,
There's a lot to complain about, I will say that.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I guess if we want to see any change, I'd say, hey, let's go voting. Vote for whoever.
I guess my problem with that, like that line of thinking specifically, is the fact that, you vote, Biden says, oh, nothing will fundamentally change. And then you have the biggest defense budget, the biggest like increase in like policing.
Yeah.
And a bunch of other stuff. Like I remember, I forget, he fully enforced like a basically turning away of all like Haitian like asylum seekers.
I did not hear about that.
And then also like I think Cubans too.
I'm not sure about Cubans, but I know somebody that would know. No, I mean, right now the biggest news that came out is that he's saying that now that Executive Order 224, something like that, is coming out, they're thinking of detaining families. Since
I heard that. I saw that this morning.
And that one was like, oh no, we're going back to like, that's bad. We shouldn't detain them. Just, I don't know. I'm a big believer. Just let them come in. It's almost like their fault for making your country good. Like if you made your country, a violence-ridden place, nobody would come to your country. But you guys made it a plan. You fed me an image of opportunity, and a lot of people see that. And El Salvador, Mexico, Honduras, all those countries see it as like, this is just not sustainable. So we go to the United States.
I want to talk about one more thing.
It wasn't me.
And it was because you brought up, you mentioned Cuba, or I mentioned Cuba, and then you mentioned Cuba. But there's a bipartisan legislation to lift the embargo.
Stop, really?
Yeah. Bipartisan, which is like I heard that as like, really?
No way.
In the Senate. It's a bipartisan motion to lift the embargo off of Cuba, which if you don't know, we've basically had an economic embargo on Cuba since JFK was in office.
Yeah, since Fidel took over.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna cry. That was the most beautiful thing I've heard today.
It'll be interesting to see, because I feel like if it's bipartisan, it could because I feel like it might be now among those senators, it's viewed as, this very like outdated. It's like, why are we still
I'm honestly surprised
this?
It lasted this long.
I feel like it would have been something that would have gone away in like I feel like the mid 90s or the early or the late 2000s or early 2010s.
Because the Cold War is such an interesting period. You see atrocities in both sides, etc. And you'd see that the embargo. I personally thought the embargo was gone, but I mean it's still there. And it's funny because I've talked to our professor, and he's always told me that. The Americans use the embargo, right? And they say socialism's bad. And then the Cubans, they use the embargo and say this is why socialism is bad, because they're blocking us from success, right? So I'm very interested on seeing, will the embargo change things, and
yeah, I've heard I think the most interesting like contradicting viewpoints is, if the embargo gets lifted, then finally this economic system that is hypothetically supposed to be like completely self-reliant will benefit greatly from American importation of goods.
Yeah.
And then also on the other hand, it's like, okay, well, if you now open the embargo, you basically, American influence can now fully get
enter
in.
back.
Yeah, which I thought was a very interesting point, honestly, in my perspective, is the fact that the embargo has kind of been like a block towards American influence in Cuba because there's no, economic investments in there as, like before Fidel and Castro and stuff.
After.
Yeah, after. Yeah. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if it even passes the Senate.
Yeah, so did it pass the House or the Senate?
No, it's just like it's now in committee.
Oh,
But it's
I
a
hope it
bipartisan.
passes.
It's a bipartisan group of senators.
Oh, okay. Well, I really hope it passes. I mean, there's no point. Like you said, this should have been temporary.
It made sense. Like it made sense during the Cold War, and especially after the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, it made sense. Again, we might have different opinions, but that's another thing. But like I just don't think it should have stayed up for as long. And again, it's funny because a lot of the like Cuban leadership, like something's like not to say the Cuban leadership has done terrible mistakes in their own like legislation, like 10 million pounds of sugar. You may be familiar with it, and they very likely blamed it on the embargo, destroying the economy. But I'm honestly looking forward if that will even increase transparency in Cuba, because now if the government does something wrong, they can't just say embargo. That's why it didn't work, And if that'll make, the government more willing to work, or at least be more transparent about their decisions. And I do hope that also opens the light to how we see Cuba, especially in the United States, where, again, I know somebody from Cuba. And, he's yeah, I think it might be the same guy.
I think it is too.
And he always tells us about Miami and how they always see Cuba bad. So I'm interested to see if that will improve the relations between American Cubans and Cubans. So I look forward to it. Again, that was the best thing I could have heard today. You made my day.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This has been Capitol Hill Landscaping with Scotty. Say thanks for our very special guest for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me again. I love this show.
And
yeah.
I will see you all next time.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.